Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for watching and thank you for being here. I know I haven't done a video in a long time. I will have videos in the near future catching up on things that I've been able to see so far in 2020, but for now, before the Academy Awards on Monday morning Philippine time, by the way, the Oscars are not going to be aired here on TV, so good luck to all of us looking for a live stream online. But yeah, before the ceremony, I just wanted to do a quick video ranking all the Best Picture nominees for this year since I finally got to see all of them. I do have predictions for the rest of the categories and you can check my written blog for that. I'm going to leave a link in the description below. But just for this video, we're going to be talking about the Best Picture nominees, which ones I think are better than the others, which ones deserve their nominations and whatnot. So let's get right to it. So at number 9 in my ranking, personally, I have Joker. And I understand that that's kind of like a controversial opinion. I know that a lot of people love this movie, and I have no problem with that. I have a lot of friends who I really respect and love who see something in this movie that I personally don't see, and that's fine. Like, we don't have to argue about it. But just from my perspective, I think in terms of the craft behind it and whatnot, I would say that it's the least impressive to me. Which is not to say that I didn't like the movie. I actually would say it's pretty good overall. I think it's impossible to deny the visuals in the film. It's impossible to deny the strength of Joaquin Phoenix's performance. However, there are so many things about it that I don't necessarily like that stop it from making it Best Picture worthy, in my opinion. I think that the movie and Todd Phillips' direction is so convinced of its own tragedy that it kind of stops making sense. There are a lot of scenes in the movie that, to me, don't really make sense within the internal logic of the film. So many scenes that just wouldn't happen given the level of realism that the film is setting up for itself. So a lot of scenes just end up looking very silly and you have to suspend your disbelief. I also do think that the messaging of the film is very mixed. Now, I don't think it's like an incel rallying cry. I think the media completely blows that out of proportion. However, I do think that it only pays lip service to several important themes, but it never actually does anything with those ideas. And I'm personally bothered by how they've chosen to characterize Arthur Fleck solely by his weaknesses and by his trauma. And I feel like if you're gonna make a movie that sort of raises awareness about mental health and whatnot, I think there are better ways to do that. There are better ways to treat your on-screen characters instead of just reducing them to pure tragedy. But also, I feel like the movie really mishandles its ideas of the frustration of the working class. I think the way that the Gotham rioters are depicted here is extremely simplistic, but that's just me, so yes. Now at 8th place for me is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Weirdly enough, while I think that this movie is much better made than Joker, it's also the only film on this list that I would straight up say that I don't like. The more I think about this movie, the more I just dislike it. Again, there are things about it that I think you can't deny. It's an exceptionally well-realized movie in terms of its cinematography and its production design and its sound. And the performances are great, from Leo to Brad Pitt to Margaret Qualley. But with all of that stuff out of the way, the more I think about this movie, the more like articles I read about it, sort of defending its qualities, the more unconvinced I am that the movie isn't just shallow. I think the way that it treats its characters is incredibly shallow, especially Sharon Tate. I think that its treatment of like 60s Hollywood is weirdly myopic and narrow-minded. And the way that Quentin Tarantino revises history in this film, I don't think really has any real message to send. And I've heard the arguments that this is like all done by design and that the characters are meant to be shallow. The message of the movie is meant to be like a spotlight on how shallow old Hollywood ideals used to be or whatever. And I've heard the arguments that you're supposed to view the movie as like a fairy tale, which to me is like a weird reading because it assumes that all fairy tales are shallow, which I don't really believe. So at the end of the day, when I think about this movie, when I watch clips from it, I just sense no self-awareness from Tarantino whatsoever. If the shallowness was the point, I don't get it from him and his direction that he was trying to make it the point. It just comes off as incredibly self-indulgent and arrogant, and it just makes me dislike like a lot of his sort of trademark filmmaking techniques. So yeah, it just annoys me very much, but I am placing it a little bit above Joker just because I think I really can't deny like the good filmmaking in it. Now at 7th place I have Jojo Rabbit, and this is a movie that a lot of people really love. It's a movie that I don't quite love. I really enjoyed watching it. I did laugh frequently throughout the movie. I think a lot of the humor really works when it's supposed to work. A lot of the dramatic moments work as well, and I'm just in love with this cast. Roman Griffin Davis is great as Jojo. Scarlett Johansson is like the most fun she's ever been in this movie. Thomasin McKenzie, Sam Rockwell, Archie Yates, the little boy, like they're all great. However, there are a lot of things in this movie that I feel like Taika Waititi doesn't really handle that well. There is a lot of humor here that I think gets old very quickly, especially Taika's whole Hitler running gag. Like, it actually stopped being funny for me very early on. And during moments when there's supposed to be some pretty high drama, Taika still sort of tries to inject a little bit of humor, and I feel like that intrudes on the drama. But my main issue with Jojo Rabbit is that where it eventually ends up, I think, isn't a sufficient enough representation of a child's experience of war. I think where the movie goes is very simplistic. I think it only sort of assumes that the kid will only see certain things and process certain things certain ways, like amid all this death and destruction and whatnot. But I do believe, like as Mr. Rogers would say, that kids are perfectly capable of complex emotions and complex feelings. And I think that there should have been a better way to convey that on screen. As it is now, Jojo Rabbit to me is fun, but it's ultimately kind of shallow. Now at number 6, I have Ford versus Ferrari. This is the one movie on this list that I think is very underappreciated and unfairly maligned, just because it is like a straight white man movie, and that's undeniable. However, it's just so much fun, and I feel like people who are writing it off just because of that are missing out on a really fun experience. I think that James Mangold's direction is incredible, just the way he handles his visuals and the sound design, especially the editing. He finds a way to make the racing exciting again. And the performances from Matt Damon and Christian Bale are so good because they're stripped down and they're focused and they're not necessarily showy in the way that you might expect. However, as much as I genuinely love Ford versus Ferrari, I wouldn't necessarily put it in like the top 9 American movies of the year or whatever. I think there are much better choices out there when I really think about it, so I wouldn't necessarily put it in the Best Picture race, because I guess like among my small issues with the movie, the main one is that I think that the screenplay, while it treats certain aspects of like racing culture with lots of care and lots of detail, there are other really important parts of the story that the movie just does not like really touch on, or it glosses over that kind of stuff. Like the whole rivalry with Ferrari is treated almost like a joke, like a caricature. Like the way the Ferrari people are portrayed on screen is just purely stereotypical. So I wish it was stronger in that regard. Now at 5th place, I have the frontrunner for Best Picture this year, and that is 1917. I'm actually not gonna say a whole lot about 1917 right now. I'll save my thoughts for a later video when I'll catch up on the stuff I've seen so far this year. But I will say that I think it's an excellent movie. I think it totally deserves its nomination here for Best Picture. I understand why so many people love it. But yeah, like I do think there are some slightly stronger films out there, which I will get into right now. Okay, so from number 4 to number 1, these are all movies that I think are incredible and I think completely deserve to be on this list, no matter what. So at number 4, I have The Irishman. There's been a lot of praise heaped onto Joe Pesci and Al Pacino for their roles here, and that's completely deserved. But I am personally shocked that Robert De Niro has been getting like 0 attention for his performance. This is one of the best performances I've seen from him in a very long time. I think it's easily one of the best performances of the year. Through like 3.5 hours, he remains its heart and its very sympathetic center. I thought he was really just so masterful in it. And the thing that I really love about The Irishman is that it gave me what I really desperately wanted from Joker and from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which was self-reflexivity and humility in the way the story was being told. I think that it's unfair if you just call The Irishman like just another mob movie, because if you watch it, if you can stick through it, I feel like Scorsese really shows like a different side to like his mob sensibilities and whatnot. This is such a mature and unglamorous take on the mob life, and I just love the fact that the entire story is really just sort sort of like a profile on these men who want to believe that they're all that and that they're important, but at the end of the day, no one's going to remember them for the things that they do that they think are great. It's really a very realistic sort of takedown of these mob figures that I think resonates perfectly, and I think it is fantastic. Now at number 3, I have Marriage Story, and this is another movie that I think gets a bad rap because of like Twitter memes and whatever. Like prior to seeing this movie, I really thought that it was going to be like lots of shouting and just be like a really depressing divorce story. So imagine my surprise when I finally watched the movie, and it turned out to be really funny and really warm and incredibly well directed. I think it is such a great sort of update on the whole Kramer versus Kramer thing. And for the record, I really don't like Kramer versus Kramer, so I really appreciate what this movie actually brings to the table in terms of like relationship stories. And contrary to all the memes that highlight that scene where Adam Driver's character and Scarlett Johansson's character are fighting in that room, I think the performances are incredible, and that's like the only scene where they raise their voices. Like the performances are so good because they're so naturalistic and they're so subdued, but you can feel all the baggage that these characters have on their minds, and I think the way that these two actors bounce off each other is so real. And I really was convinced that they were playing real people. And overall, I really thought it was just so well observed about little details in people's relationships, and especially about how certain legal processes that are designed to help people manage their relationships can sometimes just make them worse. Like most of the conflict in the movie comes from the legal processes, not necessarily the relationship itself, and I find that incredibly fascinating. Marriage Story and other movies like it are some of my favorite kinds of stories because it manages to create real drama and tension out of just like people talking. There's no explosions, there's no like speculative fiction stuff going on. Like it's really just people talking, and it's great. At number 2, I have Little Women, and I love this movie so much. I think in this entire list, if I were to choose which one resonated with me the most and got like the purest sort of emotional reaction out of me, it would be Little Women, just because, you know, the main character, Jo, is a writer, and every time she was doing like writing stuff, I felt so dialed into to that sort of situation, those dilemmas. The performances in this movie are just unreal. Saoirse Ronan deserves to win that Oscar. Florence Pugh deserves to win that Oscar. Timothy Chalamet, who hasn't been getting as much recognition for this role, I think also totally would have deserved the nomination. But I'm going to join in the chorus of voices praising Greta Gerwig as the director and saying that she should have been nominated. I think easily one of the best directing jobs of the last year. There's just so much joy and vibrancy to every inch of this movie, and I think that's difficult to take a text like this and make it feel so modern and alive and youthful again. But Greta Gerwig's strength also lies in her writing, and the screenplay in this movie is just overflowing with wisdom about everything. Like it manages to weave together ideas about love and family and relationships with a woman's independence, a woman's career, just the creative process of writing itself. And when you do get to watch the movie when it finally comes out in Philippine cinemas, you'll notice that the entire film is really sort of like a writer trying to put a story together. And I think that's incredible. I think it's very difficult to pull that off, and Greta Gerwig does it just flawlessly. I'll definitely have more to say about Little Women when it comes out, and I'll definitely make another video about it, but for now, definitely number 2, I love this movie to death. And finally at number 1, the movie that I think deserves to win the Oscar for Best Picture, as well as the movie that I think will actually win. I'm putting all my eggs in this basket. It's Parasite by Bong Joon-ho. What director Bong does for this movie is nothing short of a miracle. Like it's a black comedy that is incredibly thrilling, and no spoilers, but eventually something happens that makes everything in the movie just so utterly disturbing. And I've seen the movie 3 times now, and every single time it still holds up. In fact, it only gets more and more intense with rewatches. And while Parasite was not necessarily my number 1 film from last year, you can check my top 25 films of 2019 in my written blog as well. Cleaners is my favorite film of 2019. But I think that it's undeniable that Parasite is like the best constructed, just in terms of the language of film, its mastery over that language, just the way the film is constructed, especially from an editing perspective. It's just impeccable all the way through. It's perfect. Like there's nothing I would change about it. And I think Parasite is the best modern film about class divide that I've ever seen. just because it really manages to give an articulate voice to the have-nots, and it allows them to talk about their own plight in a way that's complex and human and sympathetic, but also very flawed. Like, none of the people in this movie are depicted as completely innocent or completely evil necessarily, and it's still an entertaining movie all throughout. So I think that this movie is the only nominee that, you know, a victory for it would actually mean something real for Hollywood and for the global industry. I think it's the only film that is this important. I think there are lots of great movies on the list, but Parasite winning would be the only result that would be history making. So those are my thoughts on the Best Picture nominees for 2020. Again, for the rest of my predictions, you can check out my written blog, which I've linked down below. If you guys have any thoughts on the Best Picture nominees and on the Oscars in general, please do leave me a comment. Thank you again for watching, and let's have a conversation.